Hey, this is Garo and welcome back to the channel. I'm continuing to work on the new body for my Fisher Space pen. Today I'll be making the grip for my pen. Instead of using wrought iron for the grip, I decided to use W1 steel for a couple of reasons. The first is that it is cheap and readily available, and I'll get into the second reason later on. Most of my builds operate around the idea of perceived precision. I first heard this term from Seth Gould, who is one of my all-time favorite makers. I don't know if he coined the term, but that's who I heard it from, and I absolutely love the expression. Precision is one of those words that means something slightly differently than what most people think it means. The dictionary definition for precision is the quality, condition, or fact of being exact and accurate, which is a definition that doesn't really explain what the word means all that well. A better way to say it is precision refers to the closeness of repeated measurements to each other, indicating their consistency and repeatability independent of their true value. So the term perceived precision could be defined as a perception of accuracy in parts made imprecisely. Maybe perceived accuracy would be a better term, but it doesn't roll off the tongue as well as perceived precision. So far, I've taken a section of W1 steel and turned the Morse taper. But when I put the cap on, there's a little bit of a wiggle. This is where that perceived precision starts to come in. I grab a little bit of sandpaper and see if cleaning up the base a little bit makes the fit any better. Which it doesn't. Instead of playing a game of guess and check, I decided to see what's actually going on. After applying some Sharpie, I can now put the cap back on, and after spinning it around a little bit, removing it leaves a witness mark where the two parts contact each other. No wonder why there's a wiggle. The cap only contacts on that tiny little ring. Now that I know where the problem is, I can come in with a combination of files and diamond stones to get the fit just right. I chase those high points around a little bit until there is no more wiggle when I put the cap on. Now when I remove the cap, you can see that there are 3 points of contact over the whole length of the taper. See, now it has the perception that it was precisely machined. When designing anything I want to build, I make sure to have as many tolerances controlled by process rather than skill as I can. Here is one of those times that I'll use process to get a perfect fit. I want to get the gap the same width between the cartridge keeper and the cap, no matter if the cap is on the back of the cartridge keeper or on the grip. Instead of trying to turn this part just based off of measurements and then being good enough that the parts just fit together perfectly, I opt to put the dial indicator on the carriage of my lathe, touch off the cap with the edge of my grooving tool, zero my dial indicator, and move the grooving tool over about 50 thousandths to the correct position. Now when I start cutting this shoulder, I know that the gap between the cap and the cartridge keeper will be exactly 50 thousandths. See, once again, it seems precise, but it's more about the way I designed the parts and the order of operations I chose that gives me the perfect fit up, and less about my skill as a machinist. Moving the grooving tool over another 50 thousandths, I can cut this thread relief groove here. With this groove complete, I can start working on this groove here. Instead of having the taper just meet the grip section at an arbitrary point, the groove will be a visual transition between the grip section and the taper. A final skim pass removes a little bit of taper left over, leaving the grip section just a cylinder. To trim this down to the final length, I make a mark with a Sharpie at the overall length I want. Then I come in with my turning tool and just remove all the material up to that Sharpie line. Next, I'll be drilling this hole here that will be the opening that the cartridge will come out of. Center drilling to start as usual, I then use a 2.5mm drill and drill until it feels like the hole is deep enough. A quick check to make sure the cartridge fits, and then I can take my compound slide and set it to an angle that I think is 20 degrees to turn the taper here for the tip of the pen. Taking light cuts, I keep removing material until the tip looks right. Adding this chamfer really makes this part come to life, and I think it really makes it start looking like a pen. The final bit of machining in this setup is going to be to put a little chamfer on this locating ring here, as well as turning the final diameter for this section that will be threaded later on. Taking the grip out of the lathe, I chop off the excess material on the bandsaw, before going back to the lathe, rechecking it back up, this time turn around so I can finish drilling and threading it. Cleaning up the end to get rid of the bandsaw finish, I taper the end to make it easier to start the threads. Using the tailstock of my lathe to keep the die square to the grip, I start the threads, or so I thought. It turns out that these threads are a lot harder than I thought they would be. This is one of those times I really kick myself for buying a cheap set of dies. I finally get the threads started, but decided to take this out of the lathe and use a bench vise to finish making the threads. The final operation is to drill this hole that will clear the body of the ink cartridge. While this hole doesn't have an exact depth I have to drill it to, I did touch off the drill using the parallel chick from last episode. Finishing that hole, I can take the grip out of the lathe and do a test fit. The threads start very nicely, and it snugs up and fits perfectly. Or does it? Those of you with an E, when I was trimming the overall length of the grip section, you can see I bit off a little bit more than my material could chew, and I ended up bending the bar. This started quite the journey to remake this part, and I am so happy I went with W1 as my material choice. These first 2 bars I rejected because I couldn't get a perfect fit between the cap and the grip. That leaves me to this one that I successfully machined. I made sure to turn this one as much as I could with the end supported with the live center to keep from bending the bar. Even with all that, there was still an unacceptable amount of runout that I am still not sure where it comes from. I decided I had enough with the machining and it was time to grab a hammer and try to fix this issue. I chucked the cartridge keeper up in the lathe and screwed the grip section into it. Mounting an indicator on the carriage of my lathe, I started to figure out the runout. When the high spot was on top, I would move my indicator out of the way and tap the end with a hammer. Checking again, I repeated this until there was an acceptable amount of runout. See, once again there is the perception of precision without being precise even a little bit. There's just one last step to complete. Remember at the beginning of the episode that I said that there was a second reason why I chose W1 steel? That reason is because it can be heat treated very easily. I want to harden the tip of the pen so that when, not if, I drop this pen on its tip, there's very little risk of it being damaged. To get a uniform temperature in the tip, I hold the grip in my cordless drill and start it spinning while I apply heat with the torch. Once I see that the tip is up to temperature, I quickly quench the end in the water to harden it. Using a little bit of Scotch-Brite, I clean up the oxides left from the hardening so that I'm left with bare metal. Once again, using the drill and torch combo, I heat up the tip until it's tempered to a dark straw color. After quenching the grip in water to keep it from overheating, I use a little bit of Scotch-Brite again to clean up the oxides. Now when I drop the pen on its tip, it shouldn't see anything more than cosmetic damage. The 3 parts I have made so far all fit together perfectly with the perception of precision. However, there was no precision involved in these parts, but rather some good planning and a little bit of know-how. Thank you as always for spending a little bit of time with me, and I look forward to seeing you the next time I'm in the shop.